My name is Elena Morales. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I honestly believed that if you worked harder than everyone else, the right people would notice. I don't believe that anymore. For 10 years, I was a project engineer at a defense contractor that liked to dress itself up as cutting edge national security. In reality, it was a graveyard of bad decisions and aging machinery held together with duct tape, zip ties, and sheer denial. If you walk through our plant, you'd see rows of machines older than some of the interns. Fluorescent lights flickered like a low-budget horror movie, humming just loud enough to get in your head. The break room microwave only worked if you held the door shut and prayed. Somebody once joked that if World War II started again, our machines would die of shock before they produced anything useful. They weren't wrong. My official title was Project Engineer. Unofficially, I was the woman who makes everything work while the boss takes credit. I was the one people called when something was hissing, grinding, stalling, or metaphorically on fire. And above me was Todd. Todd was the kind of man who thought leadership meant volume. If he talked louder than everyone else, he assumed that made him right. He strutted around the floor with a coffee he didn't make and reports he didn't read, sprinkling in buzzwords like team synergy and work family every time he needed us to absorb the fallout from his mistakes. One Monday morning, he outdid himself. We had a shipment of components going to a government client, time-sensitive, flagged in every system. Todd decided to take a shortcut with the paperwork. His shortcut sent the documents to the wrong department. The entire shipment stalled for 2 weeks. Everyone knew whose fault it was. Everyone except Todd. At the next team meeting, he stood at the front of the conference room with this fake serious expression, like a disappointed dad in a sitcom. "This delay cost us money," he said, tapping the whiteboard. "And when the company loses, we all lose. So this month, everyone's paycheck will be adjusted accordingly." Adjusted, that was his word for docked. The room went silent. My stomach sank. Rent, car payment, groceries. I could see numbers rearranging in my head. Across the table, Ben lifted his hand slowly. "Sir, with all due respect, the delay came from—" Todd sliced the air with his palm. "Ben, I don't need excuses." His voice dropped into that nasty, condescending register. "We're a family here. Sometimes we all have to take hits for the team. If you don't like it, maybe this isn't the place for you." Ben's jaw tightened. The anger on his face was almost painful to look at. He closed his mouth because what else could he do? I sat there thinking, if this is a family, I want emancipation. But I said nothing. I'd been trained by years of be patient, your time will come. So I swallowed the rage, nodded through the meeting, and went back to my desk like a good little asset. That week, one of our main assembly machines finally had enough. It was this hulking, rusted monster that had been rattling, leaking, and making horrific noises for months. I'd filed 3 different maintenance requests. Todd ignored them all. "That machine's got character," he said once, patting the side panel like it was a beloved dog. "They don't build them like that anymore." "Yeah," I'd muttered under my breath, because they learned from their mistakes. We all knew it needed to be replaced. Todd knew too. He just didn't want the expense on his budget. So instead of buying a new machine, he decided we'd patch it up. Translation: spend 2 full days performing mechanical surgery with limited tools so he could brag about cost savings in the next management meeting. One night, I stayed late to coax that fossil back to life. The plant was half dark, shadows stretching between machines. The air smelled like hot metal and burnt oil. I had grease up to my elbows, sparks flickering as I carefully adjusted wiring and hardware that should have been retired a decade ago. Todd walked by on his way out, briefcase in hand. He paused just long enough to watch me struggle with a wrench twice the size it needed to be. "Good hustle, champ," he said, like he was handing me a gold star, and then kept walking. No offer to help, no thank you, just that smug little pat on the head tone. I stared after him, fingers curling around the wrench so hard my knuckles went white. I felt this sharp, bitter thought stab through my exhaustion. He would let this place collapse as long as he doesn't have to admit he broke it. Still, I kept going. I always did. Because despite everything, I believed in the work. I believed that what we did mattered, that somewhere past the bureaucracy, there was a real impact. And I believed, foolishly, that if I kept saving their projects, someone would eventually save my career. A few days later, Todd called me into his office. His door was half open, blinds tilted just enough to make everything inside look hazy. He gestured at the chair across from his desk like he was about to change my life. Elena, he said, leaning back, take a seat. His tone was in that rare mode, fake motivational speaker instead of petty hall monitor. My instincts went on high alert. You've been doing good work, he continued. Real good. Upper management has noticed. My shoulders tensed. Compliments from Todd were like stray cats. They never showed up without bringing fleas. There's a project I think you're ready for, he said. Big one. Airborne Defense Integration Program, new Air Force client. You'd lead a team of 7. Think you're ready for that kind of responsibility? I'd been unofficially running half his projects for months. I could see the outlines of the setup. If it went well, he'd keep the credit. If it went badly, I'd take the fall. But still, it was a chance, a real one. Yes, I said, steady. I can handle it. He grinned, like he'd just granted me a wish. Good. Make me proud. This is your chance to prove yourself. I walked out of his office, trying not to roll my eyes at prove yourself. I'd been proving myself for years. But as I passed that same wheezing machine in the corner, the one we'd practically resurrected from the dead, I felt a little spark inside me. If I led this project well, if I pulled this off, there'd be no way for him to ignore me anymore. No way to pretend I was just another replaceable engineer. At least that's what I told myself. What I didn't know, standing there under those flickering lights with machine noise buzzing in my ears, was that this project would change everything, just not the way I expected. The flight to Nevada felt like the start of something important. It was only a 3-day trip for our integration project, but it felt like my moment to prove that I wasn't just another cog in Todd's broken machine. I kept telling myself I was ready for this. I had to be. The team I'd assembled was sharp, seasoned engineers, skilled designers, and diligent admin staff. We were lean, efficient, and far too used to Todd's careless management. My goal wasn't just to lead this project, but to give them something to believe in. For the first time in years, I was going to be the one who didn't drop the ball. We landed at Nellis Air Force Base under the desert sun, the heat pressing down like a heavy hand. There was no breeze, just a constant dry gust of wind that reminded me of the static charge in the air before a storm. At the base, the air smelled like metal, dust, and jet fuel. We set up in a cramped operations room, lights buzzing, the walls lined with outdated maps and rows of computers that looked like they'd been scavenged from a garage sale. Captain Reyes, our Air Force contact, was a man of few words. He introduced himself with a firm handshake, his eyes scanning the group. I liked him immediately. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was all business, something I could respect. All right, folks, I said, gathering the team for the briefing. We're here to integrate a defense system, not just push buttons and hope it works. I'm counting on each of you to bring your A game. Any mistakes could cost us more than money. They nodded, some of them a little too eagerly, like they were relieved to have a leader who wasn't going to sugarcoat things. I liked that. The last thing we needed was anyone too afraid to admit a mistake. The first test was scheduled for later that day. It was supposed to be a quick systems check before we moved on to the more complex integration. Of course, nothing went as planned. The system failed spectacularly. Lights went out. Alarms blared in a chorus of chaos. I stared at the blinking warning signals, feeling the weight of the responsibility press down on me. This wasn't just a test. This was the moment where everything could fall apart. The last thing I wanted was for the Air Force to see a woman in charge and think we were ill-prepared. I immediately called for a full shutdown and instructed everyone to stay put. The control system had crashed, and the diagnostics were useless. The tech team was scrambling to pull up error logs while I stared at the screen, fighting the overwhelming urge to panic. If we didn't get this fixed, we could be blacklisted. No one would care about the $1 million system I'd helped develop. All that would matter was failure. But I wasn't about to let that happen. All right, I said, eyes scanning the team. We're going to work through this. Ben, you handle the diagnostics. Amanda, check the wiring on the control modules. Frank, start pulling up backup components. The rest of you, keep the Air Force informed, but don't let them see us lose our cool. I sent everyone off with clear tasks, keeping the tension as low as possible. But as the hours dragged on, the air inside the cramped room seemed to get heavier, the silence suffocating. Everyone was exhausted, fingers stiff from typing at keyboards and twisting wires. But there was no time to rest. I could feel the pressure building in my chest with each passing second. Around 3 a.m., after troubleshooting countless faulty circuits and scavenging for parts, I decided to stay at the console alone. I couldn't ask my team to do what I wasn't willing to do myself, so I started rewiring the system from scratch, carefully recalibrating and replacing modules in a way that made the whole system hum with a life I wasn't sure it could still have. Every part of me wanted to collapse into the chair, but I couldn't, not yet. By 5:30 a.m., the system was back online. No more flashing red lights, no more alarm bells. I leaned back, my body exhausted, but my mind buzzing with a strange, frantic excitement. I'd done it. We'd done it. When Captain Reyes came in later that morning, he was visibly surprised to find the system running smoothly. He walked up to the console, inspecting it like a curious cat inspecting a toy. "You fixed this yourself?" he asked, his voice even, but carrying the weight of surprise. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Didn't have much else to do." He looked at me, then at the team, his lips curling into a smile. He clapped me on the back, making a loud noise in the room. "You just saved us months of headaches. Everyone owes you a beer after this." His praise felt hollow in my ears. I wasn't doing this for a beer, but still, hearing him recognize my effort, was something I'd never received from Todd, not even when I fixed the impossible. The word quickly spread throughout the site, and I could see my team stand a little taller as they learned that it was me who pulled us out of the fire. I didn't need to say a word. The respect was already there. It felt good. That's when Todd showed up. 2 days later, like a bad joke, he appeared wearing aviator sunglasses, strolling onto the site as if he had been there the whole time, as if his absence hadn't been as glaring as the sun overhead. He approached the group like he was the hero we all needed. "Good job, team. Good recovery," he said, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. Captain Reyes wasn't having it. "Actually," he said, cutting Todd off before he could take any more credit, "your engineer here fixed it single-handedly. We were very impressed." Todd's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. His eyes darted toward me for a split second, avoiding direct eye contact, and in that moment, I could see it. The cracks were beginning to form. He had to admit that he wasn't the one who made it work. I had. After the system passed final integration tests and the Air Force gave their stamp of approval, Todd did what he always did. He acted like nothing had happened. He took the credit, but this time it was hollow. I had saved the project, and the team knew it. When I finally walked out of that desert heat and into the plane back to the office, I was ready to return, to prove that I was the one who deserved to lead, and that Todd's time was almost up. The job wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I felt like I was actually in control. It wasn't just about the Air Force contract anymore. It was about something much bigger. The moment I knew I could leave Todd behind and claim what I had earned. But Todd wasn't going to make it that easy. The ride back from Nevada was quiet. Too quiet. I kept replaying the events in my head. I had led the team through a crisis, saved the project, earned a glowing review from Captain Reye, and what did I get? A pat on the back from Todd, a half-hearted "good job," and a printer. That's right, a brand new, still in the plastic printer. But we'll get to that. For now, let's rewind to the week after we landed back at the office. The week that was supposed to be the beginning of my next step. Todd was too busy strutting around, pretending to be a part of the success, to notice what had actually happened. The more he bragged, the more I saw through it. He'd done nothing but show up at the tail end, take credit, and then spin a narrative where his vision had saved the day. The reality? His absence had been the most helpful thing about the whole project. It was time to move forward, right? I thought my efforts would finally be rewarded. I believed in the system, believed the harder I worked, the more recognition I'd earn. But now I wasn't sure anymore. Then came the performance review. I had prepared myself for the meeting with Todd, sure that after everything, leading the team, fixing the system, handling the Air Force, I would finally get the recognition I deserved. Maybe even a promotion. I had earned it. But when I sat down across from him, I had this strange, gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. His office, which had always been a place of irritation for me, now felt suffocating. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting cold shadows on the walls. Todd tapped his pen on the desk, flipping through my performance metrics like they were the most important thing in the world. A practiced smile was plastered on his face. "You've had a great year, Elena," he said, scanning through the reports. "I mean, really great. All your numbers are up. I think we can all agree. You're a key asset to the company." Key asset to the company. The line I'd heard from every boss who never planned to promote me. I waited, breath held, for him to say more. "Your hard work has definitely paid off, but..." He trailed off, clicking the pen in his hand. "So, your raise is 3%, same as everyone else." I blinked, not believing my ears. 3%. That was it. Not a thank you for saving the project, not a bonus or an increase in my responsibilities, just 3%. He looked at me like he was doing me a favor, smiling proudly, as if handing me the keys to the kingdom. I wanted to laugh out loud. I kept my voice even. A 3% raise, Todd, for everything this year? He nodded, unfazed. Yes, consistency across the board. We value fairness around here. Fairness. It was the company's favorite word. A word they used to disguise apathy. A word that kept people like me in place, never moving forward, just circling the drain. And the promotion? I asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. Todd leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering for just a second. Actually, we've decided to promote Kevin instead. Kevin, my junior engineer, the guy I had trained, the one who couldn't even handle basic systems troubleshooting without me holding his hand. And they were giving him my promotion, the very same promotion I had worked my ass off for. My stomach churned. Kevin? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He's been here half the time I've been. He's not even experienced enough to handle half of what I do. Todd sighed, pushing a few papers around on his desk. He showed initiative, Elena. Sometimes that's what makes the difference. You're just going to have to try harder next year. That line, try harder next year. I sat there, frozen. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind went blank. Try harder next year. How much harder could I try? I had done everything. And for what? Another year of watching someone else get rewarded for my effort? My hands tightened into fists under the desk. 3%, I repeated, my voice hoarse. And you promoted someone who isn't qualified. Yeah, Todd said, clearly not understanding the weight of my words. He continued talking, rambling about team synergy and efficiency and all the corporate jargon he used to justify his decisions. But I wasn't listening anymore. And then, as if the universe was mocking me, he pushed something toward me, a box. It was large, rectangular, and clearly wrapped in that corporate, thoughtful packaging. I looked at it, confusion flickering in my brain. That's for you, Todd said, grinning like a little kid who just gave his friend a birthday present. I slowly opened the box. Inside was a printer, a brand new, state-of-the-art industrial printer. The kind a mid-level office manager might get, not someone who had just built a system that saved the company millions. A thank you gift, Todd said, his voice oddly proud. You've been asking for better tools, so I figured this would help. Hope it makes your job easier. I stared at the printer, speechless, my fingers hovering over the sleek surface. The irony hit me like a punch in the chest. After everything I'd done, the $1 million contract, the successful integration, the Air Force's glowing praise, this was my reward, a printer. I forced a smile, the bitterness bubbling up inside me. Thanks, Todd, I said, barely able to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. I'll print out all my disappointment in high resolution now. Todd didn't get the joke. He just patted me on the shoulder. Keep up the good work, champ, he said, walking away, oblivious to the fact that he'd just handed me a symbol of everything that was wrong with this place. I left his office numb. The next few hours were a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. My coworkers were still quietly congratulating me for the Air Force project, but it all felt like a cruel joke. The success of the project meant nothing when it wasn't recognized properly, when it was stolen by someone who had done nothing but take credit. At home, I couldn't hide my frustration. My boyfriend took one look at my face and asked, "Bad day?" "Bad year," I said, throwing my keys onto the counter. I told him everything. About Todd, about Kevin, about the printer, about how my hard work was never going to be enough. He didn't say much, just held me as I vented, as I let out all the rage I'd been holding in for years. You can't stay there forever, he told me quietly. You're not a doormat, Elena. You're better than that. His words stayed with me. He was right. I was better than this. I wasn't going to let Todd's incompetence, or his refusal to see me for what I was, define my future. I went to bed that night with a quiet resolve. The next day, everything would change. The following days after that performance review felt like I was living in a fog. I went through the motions, but inside, something inside me had snapped. I no longer cared to please Todd, or anyone else for that matter. I had spent too many years sacrificing my time, my energy, and my dignity in the hopes that the system would eventually recognize my worth. It hadn't, and I wasn't going to continue playing by its broken rules. From that day on, my approach to work changed completely. I began doing exactly what I was paid for, not a minute more. I showed up at 8 o'clock a.m., clocked out at 4 p.m. No more, no less. It was liberating and incredibly frustrating for Todd. The first time I left a meeting early, right in the middle of his dramatic rambling about synergy, Todd's face twisted in confusion. I simply stood up, grabbed my bag, and said, "Sorry, Todd, I'm at 40 hours for the week," then walked out of the room. I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face as I heard him sputter behind me. I felt like a weight had been lifted. No more overextending myself for a boss who thought my loyalty was something he could take for granted. The next few weeks were marked by the same rhythm. No overtime, no staying late to fix mistakes that weren't mine, no more pretending to be motivated by Todd's empty promises of next year and teamwork. If I wasn't getting promoted or recognized, there was no point in running myself ragged to make Todd look good. In fact, as I spent my days focused solely on the work I was assigned, something started to happen. I began feeling calmer. My coworkers started noticing too. They stopped whispering about the long hours we all had to put in and started acknowledging how much more peaceful things felt. One day, Ben, the same coworker who'd once tried to call out Todd during that awful team meeting, stopped by my desk. "You seem different," he said, his voice low. "Calmer, like you're not constantly on edge anymore." "I retired from caring," I said with a dry smile. "It's peaceful." He raised an eyebrow. "I think I need to do that too." Then his voice lowered further, like he was telling me a secret. "You know, I've seen this happen before. There was a guy named Harold. Same story. Worked his ass off for years. Got passed over for a promotion. Same old try harder next year line." I leaned forward, intrigued. "He left, started somewhere else, and doubled his salary in 6 months." Ben's voice was full of awe. "Todd's got a pattern. He promotes the easy ones, the ones who won't rock the boat, the ones who make him feel safe. And people like us, the ones who do the real work, we're just background noise." I sat back, processing his words. I wasn't the first to be burned by Todd, and I wouldn't be the last. As the weeks went on, I kept doing my job with minimal effort. It wasn't that I wasn't capable or willing to work hard. It was that I wasn't going to give more than I was being paid for. Todd's system had taught me one irrefutable truth. Loyalty in this company was a one-way street, and I had no intention of being part of that anymore. Then came the discovery of the Professional Development Fund, something I never would have thought to look for had I not been desperate for something to do other than the endless treadmill of Todd's micromanagement. The fund was buried deep in the internal system, rarely mentioned, and not actively promoted by management. It was meant to cover training, certifications, software upgrades, and other professional growth activities, but Todd had kept it under wraps, just another part of his unwillingness to spend money on his employees. I signed up for a course in advanced CAD simulation, then 3D modeling, then finite element analysis, all using the company's money. Every course, every certification was approved automatically, no questions asked. No one checked the details, because Todd was too busy running around pretending to be busy himself. Soon enough, my evenings were filled with online classes, and I found myself absorbing more than I ever had in years. It was refreshing. For the first time, I felt like I was growing, and not because Todd had noticed, but because I was taking control of my future. I didn't tell anyone about the courses I was taking, except for Ben, who seemed relieved to hear that I was no longer just enduring the daily grind. He'd already begun looking for something else, too. The thought that there was an exit plan started to feel less like a fantasy and more like a reality. One afternoon, as I sat with my textbooks spread across my desk, Todd walked past. He stopped, narrowed his eyes at the open pages, and sneered. "What's all this?" he asked, clearly irritated by the sight of me reading something that wasn't on the official project list. "Training material," I said, not looking up. "Company approved." "Shouldn't you be focused on your current projects?" he grumbled, his voice condescending. I didn't look up from my work. "Don't worry, Todd. It's for professional growth. You said we're a family, right? Gotta make the family stronger." His face twisted. "You're wasting time, Elena. Not every company needs a certified genius. Focus on what you're paid for." I felt my lips twitch with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I am. I'm just making sure I'm ready for the next step. You should try it sometime." He muttered something under his breath, clearly frustrated, but walked off. I could practically hear the wheels in his head grinding as he tried to come up with a way to exert control over my work. But the truth was, I was already long past his reach. The training didn't just give me technical skills, it opened doors. I started to see myself differently. I wasn't just Elena, the overworked engineer anymore. I was Elena, the woman who was making herself indispensable somewhere else. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building an exit. By now, I was doing more than just counting the days until I could leave. I had started building my future while the old company spun in its own cycle of incompetence. Each evening after my shift, I would log into the internal training portal, enrolling in more advanced courses and certifications that were all company approved, but served as my ticket out. And while Todd remained blissfully ignorant, I quietly worked on my exit plan. That's when I met Mark. Mark was a senior systems engineer at Aerodyne Systems, a competitor company, and we met during a week-long advanced simulation course I signed up for. He was older, more experienced, and completely unfazed by Todd's antics. We ended up sitting next to each other in class, and during the coffee breaks, we struck up a conversation. At first, we traded stories about engineering challenges, broken machines, and bad bosses. I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the start of something that would change everything. "You ever work for someone like Todd?" I asked him during a break, trying not to sound too bitter. "Oh yeah," he said, his tone light but knowing. "I've seen it before. The guys who get promoted are the ones who can play the game. They don't know how to run the machines, but they know how to keep the higher-ups happy. People like us, we end up fixing their messes, and they still take all the credit." I couldn't help but laugh at the accuracy of his words. "Exactly," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "I'm tired of fixing everyone else's mistakes while they take the credit, but I'm starting to think there might be a way out of it." Mark looked at me, his eyes sharp, like he was reading me for the first time. "There always is. The trick is realizing you don't have to beg for respect. You just have to go somewhere that actually values it." Something about his words struck a chord deep inside me. I had been so focused on trying to prove myself where I was that I'd failed to realize there were places that would appreciate my skills without the need to kiss anyone's ass or beg for a promotion. "Don't waste too long proving yourself to someone who already decided you're beneath them," Mark continued, leaning back in his chair. "When you're good, the right people notice." I felt a shift in my mind. I wasn't just waiting for Todd to finally notice what I brought to the table anymore. I was done with that. I was ready to start looking for a company that saw me for what I was worth, someone who could actually lead, who wasn't going to sit in the background while someone like Todd took credit for my work. After that conversation, I started paying more attention to what Mark was saying, hinting at opportunities at his company. Aerodyne Systems was growing, expanding its defense contracts, and they needed people with experience. People like me. He didn't outright say I should apply, but I didn't need him to. I could read between the lines. A week later, I found myself polishing my resume, not just listing my current job, but everything I had done on my own terms. My certifications, the projects I had saved, the patents I had contributed to. I wasn't going to beg for recognition. I was going to make sure the right people saw my value. I didn't tell anyone about my job search except for Ben. I was careful, strategic, but even he could tell what I was doing. "You're planning your exit, aren't you?" he asked one day, leaning against my desk. I gave him a small, knowing smile. "Maybe." "You're not going to stick around, are you?" he pressed, a look of concern crossing his face. "I'm done here, Ben. I've learned everything I can from this place, and I'm not going to stay stuck because someone like Todd is too afraid to recognize talent when it's right in front of him." Ben nodded slowly. "You're right. It's just, this place keeps people like us locked in. I don't blame you for wanting out." I didn't share the details with him, but I knew he understood. We were both stuck, but I was determined not to stay there any longer than I had to. I was done fighting a system that wasn't built for people like me. By the end of the week, my resume was ready. I submitted it to Aerodyne and several other companies, including some defense contractors I'd heard about during my training courses. I wasn't just looking for a job anymore. I was looking for respect, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. It didn't take long. A few days after submitting my resume, I got a call from Lisa, the project manager at Aerodyne who had been talking to Mark about me. "Hi, Elena," she said, her voice warm but professional. "This is Lisa from Aerodyne Systems. We've reviewed your resume, and we'd love to bring you in for an interview. Would next week work for you?" I couldn't hide the grin that spread across my face. "Absolutely." The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, paperwork, and the kind of professional respect I hadn't felt in years. Aerodyne moved quickly. They knew what they wanted, and they didn't waste time. They were impressed by my qualifications, my experience, and the work I had done. The interview felt more like a conversation than an interrogation, and that was a refreshing change. 2 days later, I got the offer. Double the salary I was making at my current job, plus overtime, quarterly bonuses, and relocation support if I ever needed it. They wanted me to lead a small team for a new defense contract they were working on. It was the kind of role I'd dreamed about, the kind where my skills were actually valued. I didn't hesitate. "I accept," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. Now it was time for the hardest part, resigning. I knew what I was walking away from, a toxic work environment where I was undervalued, where my efforts went unnoticed, and where Todd would never see me for what I truly was. But walking out wasn't going to be a dramatic moment where I yelled at him or made a scene. That was too easy. I was going to leave with quiet dignity. I waited until the end of the day. My resignation letter was printed and folded neatly in my hand. I walked to Todd's office, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. "Got a minute, Todd?" I asked, my voice calm, collected. He looked up, startled, then motioned for me to come in. "Sure, Elena. What's up?" "I'm putting in my 2 weeks' notice," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. His face went pale, and I saw the confusion flicker in his eyes as he processed what I had just said. For a moment, he looked like he didn't understand what was happening. "Wait, what?" he asked, blinking rapidly. "You're leaving?" I nodded slowly. "I've accepted another position, a better one." He stared at me in silence for a moment. "Why? After all we've done for you?" I gave him a thin smile, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition. I had worked hard for years, too hard for someone who would never acknowledge it. I wasn't going to stay in a place that didn't appreciate me. "It's about me realizing I don't need to beg for respect anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I've got a better opportunity, better pay, and better leadership." He stood up, clearly flustered. "But you've been with us for years. You're really going to throw that away?" I felt a calm settle over me. This was it. I wasn't just leaving for a new job. I was leaving because I knew I deserved better. "You mean the training fund you never told anyone about? The work I've done that's never been recognized?" "Yeah, Todd. I'm leaving all of that behind. And I'm walking away from a company that doesn't know how to treat its employees. I'm better than this." His face darkened as he glared at me. "You'll regret this. You'll see. You'll never get a job like this again." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I already had a job that respected me, one that saw my worth. I turned to leave, but then I paused, turned back to the desk, and dropped the printer on it. "For visibility," I said, a smirk tugging at my lips. And then I walked out. The next 2 weeks were surreal. As I packed up my desk, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm, almost like I was walking into a new chapter of my life. It was clear that the decision I had made was the right one. I no longer had to apologize for my ambition or water down my efforts to appease Todd. The first day I walked out of that office at 4 p.m. sharp, I felt freer than I had in years. I didn't have to rush home to answer emails or deal with last-minute crises that weren't mine to fix. The fluorescent lights, the tired faces, and the clattering of keyboards in the background. All of it was in the past now. I started my days at Aerodyne Systems with a new sense of purpose. My new role was everything I had dreamed of: challenging, fast-paced, and, most importantly, appreciated. Lisa, my new manager, trusted me to lead from the start. I could feel the difference immediately, being treated as a professional, being listened to when I spoke, and most importantly, being valued for the work I did. No more feeling like a cog in someone else's machine. At home, things were different too. My boyfriend noticed the change in me almost immediately. I was more relaxed, more present, and we actually had dinner without me rushing through it to get back to emails or worrying about what was happening at the office. We started spending more weekends together, hiking, cooking, and just enjoying life without the heavy cloud of stress hanging over me. And then came the call from Ben. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing some project files when my phone buzzed with a familiar number. "Hey, Elena, you busy?" Ben asked, his voice tense. "I've got some news." "What's up?" I replied, a slight feeling of dread settling in my stomach. "You know that system you built last year for the Air Force contract?" he asked. My pulse quickened. "Yeah, what happened?" "They're in trouble," he said, his voice laced with concern. "That system you put together? It broke. and nobody at the company knows how to fix it. They're scrambling, Elena. The client's breathing down their necks, and they're basically begging for someone to come in and clean up the mess. I didn't say anything right away. It felt like a sick joke, the kind of karma you don't see coming but secretly hope for. Todd and his crew had let the system fall apart, and now they were caught in their own incompetence. They were desperate for help, and it was a help they could have had all along if they had just acknowledged my work. Does Todd know yet? I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. Yeah, he knows. They've called in people to try to troubleshoot, but it's a disaster. Nobody knows the system like you do, Elena. I let out a slow breath. For a moment, I considered going back, offering help. I had the skills, the knowledge. Hell, I was the one who built it. But then I remembered all those years I had spent trying to prove myself to a man who never cared. I remembered the printer, the 3% raise, the promotion they gave to someone else. No, I wasn't going back. I'm not going to help them, Ben, I said finally. They don't deserve it. I'm done with them. Ben sighed. Yeah, I get it. I just wanted you to know. It's falling apart without you. Let it, I said, my voice steady. They've got to deal with their own mess now. As I hung up, I felt a strange satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. The moment when you realize that your growth, your success, is no longer tied to the people who held you back. I had outgrown that place, and now I was living proof that I didn't need Todd or his company to succeed. I had found my worth elsewhere, and I was thriving. The days that followed were filled with normality. I was settling into my new role at Aerodyne, my confidence growing with every successful project. It was everything I had wanted. My ideas were heard, my leadership respected, and I had a team who trusted me. But the echoes of Todd's failure still lingered. Word got out quickly that the Air Force system had fallen apart. A few weeks after Ben's call, I received another text from him. Guess who's in trouble now? It read. Tell me, I replied. Todd. Major fallout from the Air Force client. They tried to salvage it, but it was a total failure. The higher-ups finally caught wind of everything, and now they've demoted him. He's not even in engineering anymore. He's been moved to special projects, which is basically corporate limbo. I laughed aloud, the sound rich with the satisfaction I had been holding back. I didn't have to say a word. Todd had done all the talking for me. A few days later, during a review meeting, I ran into Captain Reyes again, the Air Force contact who had praised my work so many months ago. He smiled when he saw me and shook my hand. Glad to see you ended up where you belong, he said, his words simple but meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, I agreed with him. I did belong here. Not with Todd. Not at that broken company. I belonged with people who valued me, who respected my work and my dedication. That night, my boyfriend and I went out to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a quiet evening together. He asked if I had heard from anyone at the old company, and I told him about Todd's demotion. Are you going to help him? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head, a smile curling at my lips. No, he got exactly what he earned, and I'm just fine where I am. We toasted to new beginnings and old lessons learned. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because I had won, but because I had found a place where I could finally breathe. And every time I logged into my new job, every time I saw that salary deposit hit my bank account, I couldn't help but think back to Todd's words. Try harder next year. I smiled to myself because I did. I just didn't do it for him.